All musicians of all styles and genres who enjoy freedom of expression through music take it for granted. But they deserve to know that 3 centuries ago genius composer and the prisoner of conscience Johann Sebastian Bach battled with dogma of zombification with much risk and sacrifice. And thanks to being followed by many most popular composers' classics, his strive contributed to the critical pivot in music history. Otherwise, plain and easily landing music sounding like most of Telemann's style would be passed on to us as our musical tradition. That is why all musicians, and especially millions of students of Bach's scores and die-hard fans of the revered composer Johann Sebastian Bach have many reasons to celebrate the arrival of the new ebook by Rozalina Gutman, Paradox of Invisible Dissonance in Fugue Parody by J.S. Bach. It refers to him in rather uncommon way as the master music educator with neuroscientists' mindset. It shares rather sensational discoveries of paradoxically unnoticed innovative for his time pedagogical approaches, including his use of musical humor as the tool for optimizing learning process, and his intuitive ingenuity for harnessing its dopaminergic effects by creating the unique design for it, serves as the stellar example of intellectual leadership to follow for today's educators and researchers. Author's sudden epiphany of unearthing from stereotypes and distortions, hidden in the plain sight, defiantly used and emboldened with extra emphasis dissonant sonorities was very enjoyable, thanks to their humorous meaning. Such use of band compositional device by composer aimed at getting attention of the students to his strive of confronting dogma of zombification in music and beyond. And yet, paradoxically, it made no difference for many musicians, afflicted by the shared blind spot, demonstrating staggering power to warp sensory perception among many people. And it signaled the sobering alarm about the evident crisis in music field. These rather sensational, textbook-changing insights transpired as the result of the less common in Bach scholarship perspective of the piano instructor, graciously provided by Rozalina Gutman. Her grasp of didactic aspirations of her colleague master music instructor extraordinaire allowed for her rare glimpse into the logic behind his compositional design. Authors strive to create scaffolding for her own students that propelled them to prodigious success, allowed for her unique resonance to Bach's similar efforts of master music instructor. It allowed for her grasp of employed by him uncommon musical gift, kind heart and ingenuity, in order to offer practical, hands-on didactic solution for the learning needs of Bach's students, helpful for overcoming zombification in music. And he did it with great mastery and creativity, while tapping intuitively into dopaminergic impacts of musical humor for making learning experience fun and enjoyable for both student and teacher. Such example of didactic accomplishment needs to be featured in pedagogical textbooks. While being involved into promoting exciting benefits of hammer mechanism of the emerging during Bach's time fortepianos, he had to help his students to bridge learning curve for the technique retraining. It involved repatterning of somatic inertia of the technique habits of harpsichord and clavichord players, due to the rising need to master new ways of navigating on the gravity-based hammer action. This rediscovered fugue adds more evidence to the special chapter of Bach's legacy of his hands-on involvements into collaboration with Master Silbermann on the German version of fortepiano, that involved his personal ideas for improvements of its mechanism. The difference in technique may hard row grasp to audiences, but those who play any instrument know how significant the impact of even minor changes in technique may be. And the shift from the technique for playing keyboards with no nuanced dynamics nuances to the technique for the capable of varied dynamics gravity-powered hammer action can be observed from the recordings on the replicas of these early fortepianos. Their diverse dynamics and resulting ability for emotional and coloristic nuances palette is quite similar to modern pianos, used by composers and conductors, working on orchestral, choral and operatic scores. This helped to understand that Bach's ability to create rather complex polyphonic texture was the result of his use of different volume for several voices, combined for playing in one hand. This allows for creating essential polyphonic clarity of voicing on common during his time early hammer clave and modern pianos. This innovation allowed for the achievement of deeper auditory perspective of the developments within polyphonic layers, permitting to grasp higher complexity of polyphonic texture and follow intricate developments of each voice. The resulting nuanced expression makes a big difference in the perception of polyphonic music by the audience. And in fact, without such clarity, the listening process is very frustrating, due to the lack of clarity and the lack of emotional resonance. In other words, if complex polyphonic pieces are played in oversimplified style, without such clarity, they will likely make the listeners to come to the false conclusion that this type of music isn't their cup of tea. But when polyphonic texture is infused with nuanced dynamics, emotionally and analytically balanced engagement turns into the superb tool for brain advancement. And it can be especially instrumental for developing whole brain, bilateral, integrative cognition. Dynamically nuanced polyphony allows for its textural complexity to resemble the complexities of the interconnectedness of the realities of our life with independent of each other trajectories of various people. And it allows to embody the nature of commonly shared attributes and elements, being the foundation for dwelling in unifying harmony with each other, while providing mutual support. Such experimental model of reality allows for the embodiment and realignment to the concept of interconnectedness of our universe, based on vibrations at the subatomic particles level, that serve as universal measure of all matter, differing only by frequencies. And such use of Bach's polyphonic texture for the purpose of the container facilitates the embodiment of the complex aspects of inner psyche. For example, the fugue can serve as container for resolving cognitive dissonance that may be hard to sort out otherwise, due to intangible elements, such as subliminal pressures from conforming to social influences and the unpacked residue of trauma. The achievement of clarity through such embodiment allows for the priceless sense of emotional liberation. And this state of mind is essential for the optimal cognitive function. However, these applications of Bach's polyphony been impossible due to the false ban for varied dynamics capacities that enable delivery of complex polyphonic texture with clarity, sonic depth, and the use of tonal colors of tonalities with many chromatic keys, that is common among most pieces of well-tempered clavier. An inclusion of fugue parody into this very popular didactic cycle is indicative of Bach's priority for students' ability of projecting emotional resonance. And he made this challenge to be fun, by turning this uniquely designed fugue into the test for grasping and projecting emotional resonance to the notated intricate sense of humor. And the unresolved dissonances served as the key metaphors for the humor expression, have the capacity of the mental tickle with their sonic surprise, that makes people laugh instinctively and instantly. Upon liberation of this fugue from the layers of distortion by the tradition of political correctness, the above applications can be very effective. This ebook maps these applications, while focusing on the subjects of the urgent didactic update on the significant discrepancies of various didactic aids for teaching Bach with the score facts, related to defiantly employed by composer dissonant sonorities. They had been left paradoxically unidentified by many acclaimed musicians in musicological analysis publications and in the recordings by acclaimed musicians. The ebook guides examination of such examples of the collective affliction by the shared blind spot, indiscriminate of academic titles, awards of distinction, acclaim, and fame. And readers are referred to explore the links to the explainers on conformity concepts of social psychology that provide the framing for psychological drivers of such power for causing cognitive failure. To encourage readers' self-reflection, the author briefly described her own youth experience of the assignment to read commonly used as didactic aids analysis publications and study recordings of various acclaimed musicians, in order to form her interpretation of this Bach's fugue for performing at the college entry exam. And as the result of these scrupulous studies, she passed it with highest grades, enabling her professional career in music, despite the distorted by widespread interpretation of Bach. Only several decades later she suddenly discovered that her senses of eyesight and hearing appeared to be shut down for detection of the true meaning of satirical parody. And her sudden rediscovery of the core element of the piece, emboldened and defiant of dogma dissonance, triggered cascade of other related epiphanies with global impacts in music and beyond. Her sense of instructor's duty propelled her to share the fact that this illuminating eureka moment was enabled by the shift to the new approach that she was forced to make by the heartache, since it would get worse from the impacts of emotional repression, resulting from limiting dynamics in Bach's music, according to the universally applied exam standard for so-called historically informed performance. Many musicians had been indoctrinated during childhood into this mode of playing Bach's polyphony that entailed harmful impacts. It was based on the false assumption that he upheld common for his time dogma for withholding emotions that was imposed on music during that historical period. However, the evidence score facts in this didactic maverick prove just the contrary perspective of Bach, evident of his own focus on overcoming this common for his time stereotype. And his dedication to the cause and its reflection in many aspects of his compositional style, despite much risk and sacrifice, is evident of his prophetic and intuitive grasp of entailed with it harm. That is why, in addition to describing personal experience of the pain alarm of very negative impact of currently required ban on nuanced dynamics and imposed through that emotional repression, the author presented references to various studies that observed significant health hazards of emotional repression. This data demands for placing health and safety of students at the top of all priorities, especially when it comes to teaching approach to Bach. This data from various studies leaves no room for excuses for avoiding urgent intervention with clear message of zero tolerance to such enforcement of pathological teaching method that evidently results into lifelong emotional blocks and other health hazards. Officers at the institutions responsible for avoiding serious liability for the lack of health and safety compliance of the exam standard for irrelevant to Bach historically informed performance, resulting in mechanical, typewriter-like sound, forcing withholding of emotional repression, would be glad to have this reference list. And it is helpful to have the evident facts from the observed paradox of cognitive failure among many musicians, that demonstrated their disabled notation reading skills for grasping defiantly employed dissonance. This crisis in music education was chiefly the result of normality of such forced indoctrination of students into zombification of music and music education. Bach's design makes the use of emboldened dynamics for stressing dissonant cluster chords to be the integral part of their clashing sonic effect. In fact, readers are guided with scaffolding and detailed analysis through these details to observe Bach's didactic assignment, weaved into the texture of the piece. This intricate design requires for the strong dynamic stress, in order for this clashing effect to be clear and to project fun and humorous meaning, that is rewarding and encouraging to pursue, contrary to monotonous, zombified performance. Such special extra power of stress on the involved tones that create clashing effect is dictated by employed syncopation. Otherwise, the flawed recordings that fail this task of composer produced muffled clashing effect of employed dissonance. However, such use of dynamics was banned by the exam standard for historically informed performance of Bach. And that is the key reason why most of performers failed the intended by Bach didactic aim. During childhood, they were indoctrinated into this type of mindset. Consequently, this cognitive failure of many musicians to recognize in the score text the mere presence of these dissonant cluster chords demonstrated the evident conflict with the actual didactic aims of Bach that he spelled out with great clarity in this didactic score. But established during childhood pattern of avoiding dynamics had the power to shut down eyesight and hearing senses, due to the emotional block that had been entrained as the result of historically informed performance. The Unearthed from Distortion fugue parody on Dogma demonstrated that Bach's method of promoting wide range of dynamics was resonant to today's studies that warn about harms of emotional repression that led to the observed phenomenon of collective blind spot. This innovative teaching approach of Bach that prioritized emotional resonance in music was contrary to the musical rules and canons for composition that enforced zombification in music. Emotional detachment and associated cognitive dysfunction promoted on the subliminal level and supported the test of the culture of status quo for the senseless and ruthlessly enforced regime of monarchy that forced all its subjects to follow their senseless ruler with mindless obedience of the herd of sheep. And the evidence of the observed paradox of invisible dissonance delivered evident condemnation to such use of music education that disrupted the healthy cognitive function of gifted musicians, due to forced practice of misalignment with the natural flow of feelings. Indeed, such relic of pedagogical approaches, that forced indoctrination of young students for promoting zombification on subliminal level, should have ceased long ago along with monarchy, as the relics of the dark ages of the past. They may not belong to the culture based on the Declaration of Universal Human Rights. This subject of initiated by Bach emotional liberation is of great significance today, when the world is being threatened by the re-emergence of dictatorial regimes, installed by the misuse of wealth in blunt conflict with these democratic principles. While some music instructors are aware of the problem, they are forced to perpetrate this double standard, in order to assure for the good grades of students at the exams, since they are not in the position to change flawed and harmful exam requirements. That is why, students of all ages must be urgently shielded by the health compliance statement about exam standards from the damaging impacts of emotional repression, caused by the exam requirement for abiding to the dogma of the past. And such declaration should be made by the institutions that represent global community of music instructors. Such health and wellness needs of students, who are being affected by the exam's double standard to force their students into emotional repression. But they are not in the position of requesting for exam changes. Their representation is the duty of the institutions that have declared their mission for providing collective representation of the global community of music instructors. Such lack of declaration of non-compliance of this exam standard with related studies is especially impermissible for the organizations that declared their involvement with assuring for such compliance for health and safety of teaching methods. Needless to say, today the lack of care for the impacts of the permitted by unethical indecision suffering of millions of musicians is the notable sign of cruel negligence, profound cognitive dissonance, professional ineptness and lacking fitness to leadership positions. Each extra day of detrimental practice of emotional repression is impermissible for immersion of music students into required emotional repression, while their parents rely on sound educational methods that are approved by the institutions that are responsible for their quality. Since tradition of politically correct distortions normalized the state of zombification, the uncommon and non-stereotypical intellectual leadership of author Rozalina Gutman for making, despite all odds, her efforts to bring the spotlight to this problem among global community of musicians, is invaluable and deserves special honors. And in this case, thanks to music embodiment, the pattern of staggering power of the zombification to paralyze logical reasoning is visible and cannot be denied, since flawed interpretations of Bach's didactic exercise for using bold dynamics delivered the tangible evidence in the form of flawed printed analysis and similarly disconnected from the true meaning recordings by the acclaimed musicians. This sensory augmented data could not be mined in earlier experiments for classic concepts of social influences either, since somatic term was not in common circulation and the term music embodiment has just appeared in the scientific literature. And the term sociosomatics used by Rozalina Gutman is very helpful for providing definition of the rare deeper understanding of the inner mechanisms of transmutation of subliminal maladaptive conformity-driven morphing of perception and cognition of social brain under the pressure of social influences. The acclaimed and gifted musicians, who produced examined in the ebook flawed recordings and analysis, were among millions of other musicians, who were subjected to the notorious indoctrination into zombified performance of Bach during childhood. And it made them incapable to grasp the score facts that would reveal the hazards of the impacts of moral atrocity culture, forcing them to fear retaliation for appearing as outcasts of the tribe. This subliminal impact of moral atrocity culture had been the subject of studies for Lucifer effect, better known as Stanford Prison Experiment. Its chief observer, late Professor Philip Zimbardo, was amazed at how seemingly nice people turned evil under the influence from becoming a part of the staged culture of the prison system, based on the institutionalized human rights violations that brought up the worst instincts of incivility among highly educated future members of academic elite. The examination and deeper understanding of such conformity impacts helps to recognize the same pathological self-defeat and harm patterns that afflict the mind in multitude of other circumstances. 300 years after misuse of this system against genius innovator in using music for brain advancement Bach, the institution of prison that was misused for retaliation to his innovations remains as the archaic relic of dark ages remains as evil at its core. And since it is now being funded through taxpayer funds, it is ever more revealing of institutionalized cognitive dissonance under the name of correctional facilities, while just the contrary spirit of deliberate infliction of emotional distress with various types of undignifying, inhumane and cruel hostilities remains dominant and even justified. But, most of people, condemned to the plight of criminals suffer act in violation of moral and ethical values, because they had become the victims of the systemic injustice that power institutions refuse to address, while abusing their power for violating their social contracts obligations. And as the result, already suffering, and the least privileged populations that suffer from the long history of being disfranchised from the support networks, are not provided with solutions for their desperate need of kind care, meaningful assistance with education, housing, and other basic resources along with effective trauma therapy, based on felt sense high-efficacy modalities of expressive arts and music therapy. More than anyone among the society, the special focus is necessary for non-toxic housing, often essential for overcoming mental problems that led to crimes. Professor Sapolsky provided the important body of studies on this subject. However, his lack of knowledge about data on applied uses of music instinct made him choose the wrong title for his recent book Determined. And such lack of information due to compartmentalization of arts and sciences is unaffordable for our society. But all members of academia deserve to know that in the best-selling book Molecules of Emotion, its author and renowned Professor Candice Pert shared her observations of the inspiring for all musicians fact: vibrations of different frequencies facilitate all intracellular communications, allowing for the entry of various neurochemicals at the discovered by her opioid receptor. The book was accompanied with preface by renowned expert on consciousness and the author of close to 100 books Dr. Deepak Chopra. This critical for all musicians information provided conceptual foundation for this ebook by Rozalina Gutman. And while it guides the readers through the sobering reflection of profound crisis among music education field, it points to the evidence about brought by Bach tangible hope for overcoming the problems of self-defeat consciousness with effective solutions. The observed solution to the examined problem has great significance for practical applications, related research as well as for informing advocates for music education. The emotional reawakening, that was achieved through emotional infusion of Bach's polyphony, led to the significant elevation of cognitive performance. The author reported that her intuitive, pain-informed achievement of emotionally and intellectually balanced engagement with Bach's polyphony propelled the emergence of her heightened state of generative eureka cognition that enabled the discovery mode of consciousness. It served as the trigger for the cascade of related discoveries. This pressures for optimization of the brain function observation suggests for further research on curriculum integration of this tool. This observation was also resonant to the prolific research study by the lab of Dr. Schlag. It stated that MRI studies provided the evidence that those individuals who began music studies before age 7 developed measurably larger corpus callosum that links left and right hemispheres of the brain. This study delivered inspiring findings on the benefits of music education with the capacity for increasing the interhemispheric, bilateral balance, essential for fostering integrative cognition, that is dangerously scarce at this time. The book, Divided Brain, and other books and studies by Dr. McGilchrist on the significance of fostering integrative consciousness in order to overcome the widespread state of self-defeat that has manifested into fast-approaching anthropogenic global threat, had contributed important foundational concepts to this body of work. That is why this unconventional publication includes addendums that feature the related subjects of pressing urgency for multidisciplinary research and development of the interdisciplinary curricula. In the face of unmitigated hormone-disruptive impacts of widespread toxicity on deepening of zombification, its form of deactivated pain alarms to toxicity is spotlighted. That's why role of Bach in prioritizing music-based emotional reawakening had become existential. for sustaining and preventing collapse of civilization during countdown 2045 to forecasted by 60+ global studies zero sperm global crisis at 1% per year rate of plummeting sperm counts, that rose rapidly to 2.64% per year during 2027 to 2022 all continents study, according to Dr. Swan, the author of best-selling book Countdown. Combating current state of environmental insanity at the level of psychological drivers is critical for addressing disconnect with the reality of the rapid rise of left undeclared pandemic of environmental illnesses, caused by cumulative effects of toxicity that most people can no longer detect and avoid in multitude of toxic consumer products, due to maladaptive habituation. The public needs to know that this self-defeat does not cancel increasing cumulative effects of toxicity. That's why Rozalina Gutman's earlier call for no business as usual in her presentation for the Research Commission of International Society for Music Education demands for the urgent revision of common priorities and should be implemented with no delay. The warped prioritizing capacities are linked to the unbalanced cognitive function caused by disruption of interhemispheric balance. And the lack of focus on this outcome from inept curriculum design, that left music and the arts out of essential for finding subjects, leading to underdeveloped integrative cognition, is unaffordable for humanity. The high efficacy of the impacts of emotionally resonant and analytically engaging music-based intervention, such as liberated from confinement Bach's polyphony. The concern of Dr. McGilchrist about widespread disability to see the whole picture beyond the narrow focus on separate details can be solved through experiential engagement with music and the arts. And the efforts to assure for facilitation of the access to music and the arts education opportunities should be seen as the self-explanatory and high-yield investment into efforts for elevation of both personal and collective consciousness by the decision-makers for curriculum design in education and for community engagement. The pathways for learning the skills for self-reflection through music embodiment and other types of expressive arts is the critical undertaking towards self-propelled evolution of the evolutionary young human brain. These and other benefits of music education for brain development and advancement are of the tremendous significance, but remain largely unknown to population. That is why Ms. Rozalina Gutman made the proposal at the Research Commission of International Society for Music Education to establish the procedure of the hearings on whether the educational policy designers comply with the known to them findings to help prevent developmental deficit among population that had been leading to the dangerous dominance of individuals with significantly lacking capacity for integrative, whole brain consciousness, focused on primitive view of complex reality. The danger of self-defeating oversimplification of the problems along with the avoidance of their pressing solutions, brought humanity to existential crisis. And yet, the capacity to face it and to prioritize over everything else the efforts for the prevention of anthropogenic global threats, are absent along the public and the elected leadership. This makes transformative tools of cognitive technology, initiated by Bach, ever more important to share worldwide, one classroom, one audience at a time. Share with us the outcomes of your experience of elevated consciousness upon emotionally infused music of Bach via Contact Us form on the book's website. paradoxofinvisibledissonance.com. Discover more details on the liberated from obscurity Bach's humor-based didactic achievement for advancing brain function that remains incomparable in ingenuity, effectiveness, and is fun to use. Get the new ebook download at 25% discount now, for the limited time during book launch offered in celebration of camaraderie. See info on how to apply discount e-coupon in the description of the YouTube channel and use it at the website. paradoxofinvisibledissonance.com. Show camaraderie by sending your feedback, testimonials. And remember to include your own publication or project that would be featured to the attention of the global family of Bach's fans. And join ambassadors for Liberate Bach International campaign.